Welcome to The World as I Like It to Be. I'm your host, Eric Darnley Small. On today's show, a follow-up. The election on Tuesday has made it clear Democrats, and specifically progressives, have a lot of work to do. Attempts to create no-excuse voting and same-day voter registration in New York went down, as did attempts to reform the Minneapolis, Minnesota Police Department. What will this mean for Democrats in 2022 and beyond? Then, Eric Adams is only the second black mayor in the history of New York City. From police officer to borough president, what does the mayor-elect have to look forward to when he's sworn in this January? I'll ask Adams' fellow police officer and friend, Detective Darnley Small. Don't forget you can find out more about this show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The World As I Like. All this today on The World As I Like It to Be. Stay tuned. A bit of a different show for today. Normally I would have a full show ready for you to go. On today's show, we're doing something a little bit different. This is strictly going to be for the live portion. It's going to be short video portion. This is just going to be a follow-up on the propositions that we talked about. A lot of progressive propositions that happened both in New York and Minnesota. I want to follow up with regard to that. Then we're going to talk about some of the trials that we've been talking about. And then this is going to spin over into all audio podcast where I'm going to sit and have a discussion with Detective Darnley Small, who is a personal friend of the mayor-elect Eric Adams. And we're going to talk about in that episode stuff about how he met Adams, his relationship with Adams, as well as the kinds of things that Adams is going to face going forward, the obstacles he's going to face trying to get his agenda through, particularly in the police department and also with the government of New York, the governor as well as the legislature and all that, all of the politics that are going to be involved, particularly as it pertains to race and that kind of thing. So this is going to be a shorter than usual live video podcast. That shorter than usual video show. The podcast is going to be long. It's going to probably be, I might split it into 2 days, but I think it's just going to be about 2 hours long almost or so. And we're going to cover a lot of different issues. It's going to be, if anyone who has watched this or listened to this podcast over the years knows I've spent a lot of time talking to him because my father, Detective Small, spent a lot of time in the New York City Police Department as an instructor. He was a specialized instructor. And what his department was dealing with was, of course, discrimination and racism, sexism and whatnot within the department. So there was a lot of that conversation that's going to go back. And if you've listened to this podcast before, it may be some of it you may have heard before, but we're going to start to get into some minutia, some very interesting things that I don't think we've ever talked about before. So that's going to be a very good podcast to have, and I hope you guys listen to it. It's going to come out at 3:30 today, and it's going to be excellent. So, but before that, let's get to these ballot initiatives that happened. Now, folks may or may not recall that on the last episode we discussed the ballot initiatives. I've talked about a number of them. Specifically, and I'll go over as many of them as I can, but specifically we discussed New York and Minneapolis, I should say. And it was very surprising because I'll go over quickly. New York's ballot initiative was one that was about, was a question, I'd have to take a look at my, actually, let me just see if I can bring this up and discuss it. But the issues were around same-day voting, no excuse absentee voting, which many states have. New York does not, as well as redistricting. The redistricting one was sort of in the weeds a little bit. And you had to know kind of what the Democrats were trying to do to get a sense of that. As you probably already know, Republicans all over, we've talked about redistricting, Republicans all over have been doing all sorts of shenanigans to get the, their proper, cracking and cracking and breaking up districts and all this kind of shenanigans to go in there and try and make sure that their preferred candidate is elected, the Republican is elected, to make sure that the Democrat maybe has to face another Democrat, that their life is a lot more difficult. This happened in Georgia, Texas, you name it, wherever there is a legislature that is primarily controlled by Republicans, that's what's been going on there. So, blue states, and of course, because of the census, a number of states, including New York, lost a seat. So part of also the politics is that New York was trying to, with this question one, it was called, is trying to go out there and, make it much easier for us to sort of negotiate things so we could, if we did lose a seat, we would be able to make sure it was a Republican seat and Democrats would be safe. So it was about a protective strategy to try and keep Democrats in power and to weaken the hand of Republicans, because in Republican states they're trying to do the opposite, weaken Democrats, strengthen Republicans. By the way, just as a further note, Wednesday is going to be a podcast audio only episode where I'm going to go over in more detail the what happened on Election Day last Tuesday. So we're going to have 2 episodes of the show this week, today, Monday, as well as Wednesday, where we're going to go into more detail what was going on. But let me get over here to look at these ballot initiatives. Fascinating, because what happened in the part of the story of Tuesday is that Republicans came out. And they were motivated. There's a lot of different questions as to what motivated them, but the bottom line is Republicans came out. So here we go. This is the New York Times, by the way, and at issue were 3 of 5 proposed constitutional amendments listed on the back of voters' ballots. The first would have required that for redistricting purposes, incarcerated New Yorkers be counted at their last place of residence. But the League of Voters in New York, of women voters, and the Conservative Party argued that the measure would have reduced power on minority parties in the redistricting process. Another proposal would have eliminated a rule requiring voters to register at least 10 days before an election, while yet another would have removed a rule requiring voters to provide an excuse, such as they are leaving town or incapacitated when requesting an absentee ballot. All 3 measures failed on Election Day, according to the Associated Press. So the significance of this is, I don't know fully what the significance. I think people are going to continue to analyze it, but I remember specifically coming to New York and being shocked that you had to come up with this detailed excuse as to why you couldn't make it to the election. This was something I'm sure that was put in by a Republican, because this is the kind of stuff that Republicans do. And clearly it was something that because Republicans came out, they really, in a shocking fashion, in my opinion, really came out and blocked these initiatives. The other 2 initiatives, there were 5. The other 2, if people remember, was a right to clean water, constitutional right to clean water, as well as a change in the the amount of money that a class action lawsuit or civil court can do, as opposed, it was kind of a procedural thing. Very minimal. Those 2 passed, not controversial, not political at all. But these 3 provisions are very political. When we talk about what Republicans are doing with trying to block people from voting, part of what we're talking about is this stuff about incarcerated people being counted, being able to vote. What the voter suppression laws all over the country have been trying to do, things like take away the rights forever. Once you're a felon, you cannot vote in that state. Whether that's constitutional or not, it seems like the Supreme Court doesn't seem to want to get into that or want to even take on that issue. But that is one of the voter suppression laws that they're doing. They get you in there. You're a felon. You're marked as a felon. You can no longer vote. In some states, I believe like Florida, they had passed a ballot initiative, I think a few years ago, 2 years ago, and California's been fighting it all the way to the court because they wanted it to be, okay, so the people want felons, ex-felons to vote. Okay, you can vote, but you have to pay back all of this money, this ridiculous amount of money to the state that you may have accrued from any number of different reasons or different situations. Who knows? But it was quite, in New York, we were trying to do something about that. Which I believe, again, is probably something that was put into place by an old Republican party that had put this whole difficulty in voting. There's a lot of crazy kind of difficult stuff going on with respect to voting in New York. That as a quote unquote blue state, liberal state, you can't believe that they're there. But it just goes to show you that there are lengths to which people are, not willing to change, and that even in a blue state, if the right people, both politically as well as the right people, get out there and vote, they can block something like this. So I was surprised by this. The other major, let me just go. This was the other major story that we talked about, which was a big progressive issue, was this thing with question 2 with respect to the Minneapolis Police Department. And it is another one that got kind of rejected. I'm going to play what I've seen on this with respect to this, but let me see if this is a...
Randy, even many of those who opposed question 2 said they believe MPD needs reform and they aren't satisfied with the status quo. So what does that look like? Well, Chief Arredondo wouldn't talk about it today, but many who supported and opposed the ballot question did.
I was very happy that most of the community support the Minneapolis Police Department and they want to see us around.
Minneapolis Police Federation President Cheryl Schmidt relieved, but acknowledging that a large portion of the community still wants major changes at MPD. While not committing to specific reforms, she says she's open to the conversation.
We'd rather have a seat at the table rather than being left out.
Today, those who push to replace the police department are vowing to keep up the fight. Yes, for Minneapolis, tweeting, "We changed the conversation about what public safety should look like. Now we will work to hold the system accountable. We'll work to heal our city and create safer streets for all communities."
We're not satisfied with the status quo.
After the vote last night, North Side community leader Don Samuels, who campaigned against question 2, said they will push for reform.
We can seize this unprecedented moment to negotiate tough with the union, to support our chief, the first African-American chief.
Jeff Potts of the Minnesota Police Chiefs Association says chiefs across the state were watching the outcome closely and says they realize they need to build better partnerships.
I think it just spurs more conversations about how can we do law enforcement better.
I also spoke to others on the side of the issue, like Nikema Levy-Armstrong today, a vocal critic of MPD who voted against the ballot question. She says this isn't a victory for anyone because there are still so many reforms needed and so many problems to solve with MPD. Julie?
Thank you, Lauren.
So thankfully, the people of Minneapolis are not giving up with respect to their fight for reforms to the Minneapolis Police Department, because the Minneapolis Police Department is horrible. But, I said this on this show last week when this came out, that don't be surprised that a lot of black people will vote against this kind of thing, because black people do not want, particularly older blacks, do not want to see the police department go away. And probably the biggest issue with respect to this was that they did not come up with a very solid plan as to what this new police force would look like. And part of the reason why is because this, if people remember correctly, there was a video that went along with it. And in the video, they were limited to how much they could talk about this because of the nature of the politics and money, and there became an ethical issue with regard to how much an elected official can talk about a ballot initiative and what they want to have done. So I think that stymied the conversation to some extent. And really the plan should have been already created and already built out and ready to go, but it wasn't. And that hurt the process. But they are vowing to fight on, and I hope they do, because the Minneapolis Police Department is terrible. So all that to say, to be continued, I think, thankfully. Now on to the other follow-up stuff. We've got these 3 trials that I've been following. Actually, 2 of them. One I said I was going to file, which just began, Ahmed Arbery. This is, again, the jogger, citizen of Georgia, goes out jogging one day, goes into an abandoned house, a house that's being built. He comes out running, and these white guys go after him in trucks. They shoot, they kill him. These 3 guys are up for murder. And part of what's going to go on, and a cousin to this story, is the Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse story. This is a young white kid that came from, I believe, Illinois to Wisconsin, Kenosha, to quote unquote protect the building from rioting and looting, and got into a scuffle and shot and killed 2 people, injured a 3rd. And the reason why these are a cousin is because I think we're going to have to start looking at and rethinking about the use of guns. And unfortunately, this is what had to happen when the Supreme Court decided that everyone has a constitutional right to a handgun, because no longer part of what that has done is say it's the onus and the responsibility of the handgun owner to be responsible. And in my view, and this is what's going to come out, I think, very strongly, I think a lot of people with respect to the Rittenhouse trial, it looks very much like, actually with both of these, but with the Arbery trial I was watching, is looking very much like Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin, of course, was killed. He was in Florida. Young man killed by a guy who was a wannabe cop. He was supposedly a guy who was security in his community. And he saw Trayvon Martin, thought he was a criminal. He was wearing a hoodie, thought he was a criminal, but young black kid. This guy was a Hispanic guy. And he confronted him about what he was doing here. He was armed. They got into a fight. He shot and killed Trayvon Martin. And his defense was self-defense. This is the basic same story right here again. These Georgia guys assumed that he was a criminal. They went after him. He began to, he began to overpower them. Then they shot and they killed him because he was quote unquote a danger. Here is, and to me the biggest thing is that you have to get over is, how is it possible a guy can overpower 3 guys, right? You've got 3 white dudes, and yet somehow 3 of these guys, and they're in cars, feel that one black guy can overpower them. So they needed their shotguns. They needed guns. They couldn't have taken him down with anything other than that. The same thing is going to be with Rittenhouse. Why, this guy is walking around with a long gun. If he wanted to protect and he needed self-defense, why didn't he take a bat or a knife or whatever? So, but part of what's happening, I think, in the conversation is that the onus is going to be upon people to be able to control themselves and to be able to protect themselves and to be able to show restraint, because there's no longer a duty to retreat. Right, there was back in the old days, you had a duty to retreat, and the only place where you could stand your ground was in your home. Right, that was called the so-called castle doctrine, under the idea that your home is your castle and you have a right to defend it. they have extended that. The right wing Republicans, mostly Republicans, but you get a lot of people who are Second Amendment enthusiasts. You got a few of them on the Supreme Court, and militias and whatnot that are out there. And part of what they've been able to do under these stand your ground laws, that was the case in Florida, Trayvon Martin, stand your ground, was this idea that you no longer have a duty to retreat. You can now defend yourself if things go sideways in a fight. So that is part of what's going on here in Rittenhouse's case. I'm going to discuss them both. But already race is being introduced into this, because this is out of CNN, and as indicated, it's a part of what's happening is that immediately in this, they've already discovered that the trial has been not the trial, but the jury has been selected, and already there's a problem with respect to race. And it goes, after a long contentious jury selection process in coastal Georgia County in preparation for the trial of Ahmed Arbery's killing, a panel of 12 people were chosen last week Wednesday, consisting of 1 black member and 11 white members. The jury was selected after a 2.5-week selection process that ended with prosecutors for the state accusing defense attorneys of disproportionately striking qualified black jurors and basing some of their strikes on race. Judge Timothy Walmsley said that the defense appeared to be discriminating in selecting the jury, but that the case could go forward. Now, isn't that bizarre? I've never heard of something like that. The defense appeared to be discriminatory in selecting the jury, but the case can still go forward. This court has found that there appears to be intentional discrimination. Stunning. But let the case go forward. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it goes on to say, of the 16 total jurors selected, including 4 alternates, 5 are men, 11 are women, according to the pool reporter inside of the courtroom. In Glennis County, where this is being held, where the trial is taking place, more than 26% of the 85,000 residents are black, and about 69% are white, according to data from the U.S. Census Bureau back in 2019. It goes on to say, I don't want to go through the whole thing, but it would appear that white males in the South so the defense attorney talks about there's not enough Bubba men in the jury. So while the prosecutor is saying that there's not enough people of color, the defense is saying, well, it's a wash because there are not enough Bubbas. Attorneys previously expressed concern over not how many people didn't show, but also who was missing among those who did. It would appear that the white males born in the South, over 40 years of age, without a 4-year college degree, sometimes euphemistically known as Bubba or Joe Sixpack, seem to be significantly underrepresented, defense attorney said. Without meaning to be stereotypical in any way, this is a defense attorney, I do think that there is a real question in this case whether the demographic is underrepresented in this jury pool, and if it is, then we have a problem with that. And again, this is CNN. CNN's legal analysis, Paige Pate, said participating in the jury pool is important, but only so much to establish diversity of race and perhaps gender, but not Bubba background, whatever that may be, Pate said. I've represented doctors who have gone on trial. Now, was my jury made up of a bunch of doctors? Of course not. Even if there were no Bubbas, as long as the lawyers are not removing people solely because of race, there's really no problem, Pate said. You have no legal right to a Bubba-rich jury pool. So, almost no matter what happens at the end of this trial, whether these guys are found innocent or guilty, there's going to be controversy because of this so-called voir dire process. That people are going to come away, someone's going to come away saying that it's it was an unfair verdict because of the representation was not equal, or was not what we wanted it to be. But there is a lot of, by the way, with respect to all of these trials, there is drama going on with everything around it, from the jury to the behavior of some of these people and whatnot. I am not getting into this. I'm trying to stick strictly to the case. So I haven't, but both Theranos and the Rittenhouse, particularly Rittenhouse's jury, as well as this jury and Ahmed Arbery, I don't know if this is something that's usual, but it seems to me to be something that is very unusual in my mind, because there is a lot of drama going on, and which I'll go into in a minute with regard to Rittenhouse, how one juror had to be excused. With respect to this trial, the biggest drama that's been going on is that nobody wants to be a part of this jury. There is a lot of business going on where the jurors are trying to do everything they can to get out of this jury. So there are very few alternates left. If you start striking people for a bunch of different reasons, you may have, and I don't know if it indicates on this how many are alternates, but eventually you're going to get down to no alternates if you keep striking people for things that were said, things that were done, etc. But that's a fascinating aspect of trials, just, in general. But this is a fascinating aspect with these three cases. I'm going to talk about trials. Moving on to, again, staying with CNN and Ahmed Arbery's case. It goes into the opening statements. This was on Friday, so this is literally just begun. In her opening statement early Friday, prosecutor Dana Dunsky argued that defendants tracked down Arbery and cornered and fatally shot him without evidence or knowledge he'd done anything wrong, despite saying they were attempting a citizen's arrest. And I'm gonna cut right to the chase so that I can, because I don't want to spend on a lot of time on this. In their opening statement, attorneys for the McMichaels, these are the defendants, contend that their clients were trying to conduct a citizen's arrest of Arbery, whom they suspected of burglary, after they and several neighbors had become concerned about individuals entering a home under construction. Travis McMichael only shot Arbery in self-defense, they said. This is another thing, and I think that you find this even in professional cops, this idea that we suspected these some shenanigans going on, and it just happens to be with the black men. But we suspected these guys, and we were attempting to arrest them. There is something apparently in the law in Georgia that allows people to do this, to exact a citizen's arrest. It apparently goes way back, and it was targeted towards blacks during slavery. And it was, I think adjusted or something by the courts, but it was never stricken out of the law. So, if you're thinking, and I think one of the reasons why people are saying Trayvon Martin and all this kind of stuff, these southern states, there are a lot of laws that are on the books that are just no damn good, that come from a racist background, that have never been struck, and they're still on the laws, and they're still being used today, and people want to be able to use them, right? They want their guns, and they want to be able to, and this is, again, get involved, because just like with Rittenhouse, these guys are at home, and they should have called 911. They should have decided to let this thing and tell the owner. The owner didn't hire these guys to go out there and decide to try to exact citizen's arrests if people, were in his property and weren't supposed to be. Who told these guys to go ahead and do this? As with Rittenhouse, this is the same situation. These are guys who are leaving the comfort of their home. They're going out and they're looking for trouble. And they have decided that they're now the law, that they're going to go out there and they're going to protect the sidewalk, protect the community, protect with shotguns and with AK-47s and all this kind of business. And this is the Wild Wild West sort of a behavior, the Wild Wild West way of policing. What do you need the cops for if you got these guys? So this is the other thing that I think is going to be very important from this case, and one of the reasons why I want to follow it with Arbery and Rittenhouse is if you leave your home. And in Rittenhouse case, another state, with these guys, they just go out of their home. if you leave your home and go into another place and get into it with another person, and you pull out a gun and shoot that person, can you say that self-defense? So if you are a criminal and you've just committed a felony and a guy is trying to stop you and you shoot and you kill that person, can the shooter, who is the criminal in this analogy, say, I was defending myself so I could get away with it? Or if you're somebody who's out there and you've decided to quote unquote become, I remember the old days, guardians angels used to patrol the trains. And it's like, if you go out there and you decide that you're going to be the protector of New York City, and in protecting New York City, you end up getting a beat down, but you end up, hurting this guy to the point where he's crippled or dead, can you say, hey, standing my ground, I'm doing the right thing? This is why the duty to retreat is so logical. It's to prevent people from becoming cops or becoming superheroes or whatever. Getting back to the CNN report. So they start talking to this guy who is Dugan, who is the police officer, who is the first person to respond. And his name is Glennis County Police Officer William Duggan. Either Duggan or Dugan. I don't know what his full name is. And let me see if I can bring this up in this section. I think next time I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Glennis County Police Officer William Duggan testified he responded to the scene after finishing an off-duty job because he was nearby. He told prosecutors that he found a black male on the ground and saw other people nearby who he later identified as the defendants. So Dugan has a body camera on, which sort of captures a lot of this. So it says Duggan's body camera footage was played in court, appearing to show Arbery's lying motionless, face down in the street. The footage showed Dugan turning Arbery onto his back, his shirt and shorts saturated with blood. There's nothing I can do for this gentleman, Dugan is heard saying before removing his gloves and wiping his hands with a towel. EMS and fire personnel arrived soon after, the video shows. A lot of this is just getting the players in and seeing what they saw, getting that into evidence. A lot of this early prosecutor testimony. During cross-examination from Jason Sheffield, an attorney for Travis McMichael, the officer confirmed Arbery's eyes were not moving when he checked on him. Dugan also testified that he did not have to use verbal commands to de-escalate the defendants in any way, which added that George McMichael started to walk towards him 2 times, and the officer put out his hands and told him to stay back. The court adjourned after 5:30 p.m. following Dugan's testimony and is scheduled to reconvene today on Monday. So, this is all groundbreaking stuff as far as this is all, setting the scene sort of stuff. It's all there to sort of give the people an idea of who the people are, what they were there, what they saw, all that kind of stuff. So early on in this case. Moving on to the Rittenhouse case. They're also early on in this case. This is only a few days, but there's quite a bit of content already. And it is a little bit of a challenge to get it all, because the voir dire portion of this was, extensive. It was long. And there's a lot of the first 2 days that was just that portion of it. And there was, like I said, there was a lot of drama with respect to that. But I'm going to go through this very briefly so that we can get straight to it. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can. Let me see if this video. No, we've got a little bit of video. We play this video? Let's play this video and see. Cannot be heard. Let's see if this is helpful. I hadn't planned on this part of this, but let's see if we can play this video.
Of its case and Mr. Muir.
I'll represent to the jury again without dispute that the 4 shots that were just heard are the 4 shots that the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, fired at Joseph Rosenbaum.
Yeah, that's the defendant, correct?
Yeah, that's Mr. Rittenhouse.
Agreed?
Yes. Okay. Does he, during this time that you saw him, does he appear to be agitated or irritated in any way to you?
Right there, it looks like he's just kind of standing, looking around.
Okay.
Just kind of looked young to me, and he had these gloves on, and he was smoking cigarettes and stuff. So I don't know, I kind of was like, he's kind of seemed like an interesting figure, so I just took a mental note of that. It wasn't anything, I wouldn't say malicious, I just, a young person in a situation. Honestly, I would say it was mainly the gloves. I don't know why he had the gloves on. It kind of stood out.
You're still under oath, sir.
All right, let me try to get out of this thing now. Hold on a second. Okay. So, that was a interesting piece of testimony. But prosecutors asked a few questions of Genosha police officer Detective Martin Howard, and instead used much of his time on witnesses on the stand on Wednesday, this is last week Wednesday, to offer commentary on the video footage that captured Kyle Rittenhouse shooting 2 people fatally and injuring a third. Howard said Rittenhouse fired a total of 8 times throughout the entire sequence. The first 4 were directed at Joseph Rosenbaum, which they mentioned there. Rosenbaum. He is one of the victims. And Rosenbaum was seen on video chasing Rittenhouse into the parking lot of a business before gunshots ring out off camera. At the time, Rosenbaum had his shirt off and wrapped around his head. Rosenbaum was not armed with a weapon. He carried only a plastic bag he had after being discharged from a hospital that same day. After Rittenhouse fires 4 times, 3 of the gunshots can be heard. Howard said police have not determined who fired them, but that it was not Rittenhouse. In the aftermath, Rosenbaum's shooting, Rittenhouse appears to make a phone call to his friend Dominic Black that he shot someone. Meanwhile, multiple other people rush to Rosenbaum's aid. Rosenbaum is then seen running down Sheridan Road as multiple members follow and shout at him about why he shot Rosenbaum. Eventually, several people run up to Rittenhouse and either take swings at him or attempt to disarm him as he falls on the ground. One of them was Anthony Huber, who Rittenhouse... I don't know what that's all about. Hold on one second. Mic check. Okay. Mike is back. Thank God. Moving on. Okay. Getting back to this trial here. In the opening statements, attorneys for the McMichaels contend that their clients were trying to conduct a citizen's arrest of Arbery, whom they suspect of burglary, after they and several neighbors had become concerned about individuals entering the homes under construction. Oh, wait, this is McMichael's. I'm sorry. This is the McMichael story. I lost my place here for a moment. Sorry about that. So, this is Rittenhouse. Eventually, several run up against Rittenhouse, Huber. Right. So, Corey Washington, who we just saw on the stand, is testifying. And I actually think I've got the wrong, excuse excuse this web page. I'm just going to read it. This is the wrong page for it. Corey Washington, a social media influencer who was present the night Rittenhouse fatally shot two people, said there were visibly more people out protecting property August 25th than the previous two nights, when Kenosha suffered extensive property damage during the civil unrest. Questioned again by Binger, Washington said that the crowd was calmer on the 25th. Binger played extensive footage from Washington's live stream that night of the 25th. A lot of people were out there live streaming, which showed a mostly calm crowd standing idly near a gas station along Sheridan Road. Rittenhouse was seen at one point running across Washington's camera, catching the attention of Washington, who decided to follow him for a period of time. He told Binger that Rittenhouse stood out because of his age and the fact that he was carrying a gun, wearing gloves, and chain smoking cigarettes. Rittenhouse's friend Dominic Black testified he purchased the gun for Rittenhouse used in the shooting. The two men drove to Kenosha the morning of the 25th to help clean up graffiti. Afterwards, they met two owners of the Car Source, a used car lot, which has 3 locations. Black and Rittenhouse agreed to help protect the property. On day 4, Ryan, I'm just going to say his first name, Ryan, who went to Kenosha the night of the shooting with 2 guns and body armor to protect businesses, testified that he spent a lot of time during the unrest trying to diffuse arguments. He said he specifically noticed Joseph Rosenbaum, who didn't appear to be organic with the protesters. This is very interesting. Every time I encountered Joseph Rosenbaum, he was hyper-aggressive and acting in a violent manner. Ryan said at one point he got between Rosenbaum and another member of the group of armed men during a confrontation. The armed men had tried to stop Rosenbaum from starting a fight with Ryan. From starting a fire, this guy said. He testified that Rosenbaum shouted, "If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm going to effing kill you." Rosenbaum was present for the interaction, Bryan said. This is now another witness. The Daily Caller videographer Richie McGinnis encountered what happened in the moments after Rittenhouse shot Joseph Rosenbaum. He said he is not sure how, but his phone began recording video as McGinnis was standing over Rosenbaum's body trying to help him after he was shot. McGinnis told defense attorney Mark Richards that he was carrying Rosenbaum to the van. As he was carrying Rosenbaum to the van, somebody in the surrounding crowd punched him in the side of the face. McGinnis rode in the back of the van with Rosenbaum to the hospital. To the hospital doors and helped load him onto a gurney, he testified. He also elaborated on the movements of Rosenbaum and Rosenbaum and Rittenhouse before the shooting. Rittenhouse was holding his gun at a 45-degree angle before Rosenbaum lunged with both hands outstretched for the front portion of the gun, McGinnis testified. On day 5, 2 of the members of the family that owns the 3 car lot property along Sheridan Road in Kenosha denied ever making arrangements for Kyle Rittenhouse or anyone to protect their business during the days of the unrest of the shooting of Jacob Blake. This reminds me exactly of Ahmed Arbery, the owner of the house that Ahmed Arbery was supposedly stealing from, had run up to and was stealing from. The owner of the house said, I didn't tell anyone to defend this house. All I did, nothing was ever missing. Nothing had ever disappeared or was stolen. All I did was install cameras. But as far as telling anybody to go out there and to protect this property, I didn't tell anyone to do that. This is, again, now another case where, these guys are saying, the owners of the parking lot, that Rittenhouse is saying, they told them, let's secure it. They're saying nobody was supposed to secure this car lot. So these are people who are going out. They're doing citizens arrest. They're going out and they're so-called protecting the city. And no one is asking them to do this. No one's asking for their help. They're going out there and they're doing this themselves. Is that actionable? Is that something where if that happens, you end up in a situation and killing somebody? Can you be tried for that? So these are the main questions that have to be answered. And these are the main questions where, Georgia is the South, the Deep South. And I think a lot of people do believe that you should have the right to go out there and defend property if need be from hooligans and people who you think are a problem. But they denied ever making arrangements with Kyle Rittenhouse or anyone to protect their business during the days of unrest after the shooting of Jacob Blake. Miss Stewart, the fiance of Joseph Rosenbaum, said on the witness stand Friday that Rosenbaum had taken medication for bipolar disorder the day he was shot and killed by Rittenhouse. In addition to accounts of intentional, reckless, and attempted homicide and reckless endangerment and curfew violation, Rittenhouse, 18, is charged with possessing a firearm as a minor, which is a misdemeanor. I thought that there was a federal crime in going over state lines with a weapon, with a gun. I know if it were drugs, it would be. So that is the case with that. Moving on. This is now the Theranos trial. This is Elizabeth Holmes' trial. And this video has ended up to be longer than I thought it would be, but it is important to follow up on these. So this is, again, Theranos' trial. The prosecutors, this is another trial, by the way, has all sorts of drama going on, not just within the trial, but within the jury, because they're expecting all of these high-profile folks to show up because they were all defrauded by this woman. And the first of the so-called famous people, high-profile people to show up is James Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, right? But they expected people like Rupert Murdoch and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who they were on the witness list to be called, who were all, these people were all investors in this crazy scheme. So this goes on to say the prosecution called its first high-profile witness, James Mattis, to the stand. Mattis, a retired Marine general, served on the company's board and communicated directly with Holmes many times. In at least one email shown in court, he referred to her as young Elizabeth. There is a part of this story about the charismatic nature of Elizabeth Holmes that comes out in the documentary Out for Blood, is that this woman was almost like a Svengali. She was able to get these men who were, older men. She was able to talk to them and to get them to, believe whatever crap she was saying. And it's pretty fascinating to hear about this. And there's even talk now about how she may be weaving her magic on the jury without saying anything. This goes to show you how the bias, and we're going to talk about that later in the podcast, but Mattis testified that he believed Theranos was capable of running thousands of tests on its own device. If he had known the devices could run only about a dozen tests and was relying heavily on third-party machines, as prosecutors have alleged, it would have tempered my enthusiasm significant. A former lawyer with Cravath, Swan, and Moore named Daniel Mosley testified that he introduced several high-profile clients to Holmes, including family members that represented the Walton family, the Walmart heirs, the DeVos family, and the Cox family, Atlanta media moguls. He said that he'd first heard about Theranos from his client Kissinger. This is Henry Kissinger, who then served on the company's board. So this is a person who, and that's Elizabeth Holmes and her mother. This is a person who, and we heard about this in the testimony before, who was going around trying to meet as many rich, and there's no crime in this, going around and trying to meet as many rich people as possible, influential people as possible, because they then build on themselves. It's almost like they snowball. In one case we heard about last week where the executive, one of the reasons why the DeVos family, one of the reasons why they got involved is because they'd heard the Waltons were involved. There was also, which I do not have here, I think there's also reporting that came out that she had, I may have talked about last time, that she had used doctored logos from other companies, by the way, again, as a way of lying about the efficacy of her equipment. But one former lab director, Adam Rosendorf, was grilled by lawyers for 6 days, sometimes clashing with the defense team. Defense attorneys Lance Wade questioned Rosendorf about his responsibility as lab director, pointing out that he was responsible for many things. Rosendorf shot back, suggesting it wasn't responsible to pin everything on him. It wasn't reasonable to pin everything on him. You keep saying it's my job, but I was part of a large company with delegated roles, Rosendorf said. Yes, I did my job, but I also depended on a lot of people around me. So part of what's going on here, by the way, is that there is this sense that there's a lot of the blood evidence is becoming, they're getting too much in the weeds, and this is tiring to the jury. One juror was dismissed because she began playing sudoku during the testimony. And Am Sill, a retired biotech executive who has attended court nearly every day of the trial, said it seemed unlikely the jury is following all of this in-the-weeds science. I definitely think a lot of it is very technical and detailed about the technology and about the quality control metrics. So, and this is, like I said, the federal district judge, Edward Davila, questioned one of the jurors who admitted she had been playing Sudoku during some of the parts of the testimony. She was feeling fidgety and it did not affect her attention, the jury explained, according to a transcript of the conversation obtained by the Wall Street Journal, but the judge dismissed her at the defense team's request. That leaves the jury with 2 alternatives out of the original 5. One juror was dismissed early in the trial because of a conflicting work schedule. Another was sent home shortly because of her religious faith made her uncomfortable with the idea of punishment. Another surprise came early on in the form of a mysterious audience member. Before opening arguments began during the jury selection, a man dressed in a casually chatted up reporters and sat eating snacks in the back of the courtroom. He told reporters his name was Hanson and that he was a concerned citizen. In reality, the man was San Diego hotel owner William E. Evans, father of Holmes' partner Billy Evans. This became evident when he walked in with Holmes during the first day of the trial by wearing a suit. Evans did not respond to a message sent through his hotel website. In a brief conversation, he told NPR that people have nicknames and you can be free to use them. So, a lot of drama and a lot of crazy stuff going on. I should say, just to continue with respect to Theranos, the prosecutor is still presenting its case to the jurors, and it's unclear when the defense will take over. Even more unclear is the pressing question, will Holmes testify on her own behalf? So, I'm gonna keep following these stories, and there has been a lot of stories right now, a lot of trials right now that have been pretty fascinating in my view. Hopefully you find this fascinating as well. Stay tuned. Do not, if you're listening to this podcast, and if you have not signed on to the podcast, Apple Podcast, as well as Spotify, search for The World As I Like It To Be. That is the name of the podcast. That is the name of the show, World As I Like It To Be. Take a look there, because I am going to have, as the continuation to this, an interview with Detective Darnley Small. We're going to talk about Eric Adams. We're going to talk about the stuff that he faced and police officers faced in the department with respect to race, how Eric Adams could challenge those kinds of things, and more. So that is going to be probably a two-parter, because that was a very long podcast, and we'll go from there.